We are going to take you live now to Sydney, where Health Minister Brad Hazzard is giving an update.
Kirby Institute, who's over here on my left, and Dr. Jeremy McAnulty, who is the Deputy Chief Public Health Officer here in New South Wales, and I have Assistant Commissioner Karen from New South Wales Police, and each one of them will be discussing various issues. First of all, the good news is that in the 24-hour period up to 8 p.m. last night, the numbers of cases in New South Wales have again come down, and we're now at 10 total cases in that 24-hour period. So that takes us to 2,936 cases. So that's certainly positive that there's been a reduction in the number of cases, and it's particularly positive having in mind that the number of tests that were done in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night have dramatically increased. We had 5,152 tests. And just remind you that last Monday, I think Easter, we were talking about 1,305 cases. So it certainly is a dramatic increase, and that's positive, particularly when you think 10 new cases, but 5,152 tests. That takes the total testing done across New South Wales to an incredible number of 160,454. I'm so proud of the community for coming forward, but also our health staff and pathology staff who together have ensured that New South Wales leads the entire country in terms of the numbers of testing. We are way in front of any other state or territory. And the good news is that out of that 160,454 cases, 157,518 people have tested negative. So that's a very big positive. We need to focus on that and say that considering where we thought we might be when the original forecasting was being done, thank you to the community for your listening to the message on social distancing, because it's making a huge difference here in New South Wales, making a huge difference across the country. If the community hadn't listened to that message, we would certainly be in a lot more challenging times than we currently are. But we can't afford to change what we're doing in a sense of people not social distancing. You must still stick with the social distancing. Can I say, sadly, we did have 2 more deaths. 2 more people have passed away. People whose families today will be obviously very sad. And I think on behalf of our entire New South Wales community, I express my sympathy and the community sympathy to the families of those 2 people. One was an 83-year-old and one was a 58-year-old, and Dr. McAnulty will give further details in relation to those people. Our ICUs across the state, we currently have 25 patients in our intensive care units, which is again far less than we thought we would have, but far more than we want actually with COVID-19. And of those 25, 18 are ventilated. I've indicated this before, but I think it's appropriate I do it again. I've been closely examining the numbers as they increase, although modestly, and we remain at around about 42% of all of the cases, all positive cases, are people under the age of 40. So for those of you who think that you can't get COVID-19 because you're younger, well, the answer is you absolutely can. In fact, 1,238 people of the total 2,936, let's repeat that, the 1,238 cases of the total 2,936 cases that are confirmed are all under the age of 40. So my strong message as Health Minister here in New South Wales to young people is take it very seriously, very, very seriously. And interestingly, when we look at the particular group that has perhaps got the highest number by a long shot is the 20 to 29-year-olds. Social distancing is what is keeping us safe. It's what is keeping our community safe, keeping individuals safe, keeping your family safe. But for some reason, the 20 to 29-year-olds, you have to get the message, guys, that this is actually not the time for partying. It's not the time for hanging out in large groups. We're serious about the message. And the message is stay safe and stick to the rules. Stick to the 1.5 metre social distancing. We've had people as young as about late 20s, early 30s across the country who've ended up in our ICU units. So just take it seriously, please. Social distancing is the message. That 1.5 metres distance can make a huge difference. It can save your life, it can save your friends' lives, your family's lives, and of course you can try and avoid sticking to the 1.5 metre, but you'll probably find yourself not avoiding the ICU units if you do that, so stick to the social distancing. Today I also want to announce that we have New South Wales Government has allocated another $25 million to research, trying to just get to a point where we can actually take preventative measures but also deal with the vaccine that's so necessary. Professor Anthony Kelleher from the incredible Kirby Institute from the University of New South Wales will make some comments on that after I've asked Dr McAnulty and after I've asked Assistant Commissioner Webb to make some comments with regard to their matters. But it is incredibly important that we back our researchers. Our researchers in this state, across this country, have made huge changes in some of the greatest challenges of our time. And I'll let Professor Kelleher make some more comments about that. So I'll now pass to Dr. Jeremy McAnulty.
Thanks very much, Minister. As the Minister said, we've had 10 new cases diagnosed yesterday, which is good to see the numbers continuing to stay low. And we have had around 5,000 tests done in the same period. Now, it's really important that we continue testing to flush out people who may have the infection so we can make sure they're cared for and we can make sure that they're appropriately isolated at home or in hospital and that, importantly, their contacts are identified and also cared for and put in self-isolation so that there's no onward transmission. So testing is really important. So if people have symptoms, then they can go to a COVID clinic or talk to their GP or an emergency department so that they can be tested to make sure that they do or don't have the infection and the other public health measures can follow. As the Minister said, it's sad that 2 more people died yesterday. An 83-year-old man who had been in Royal Prince Alfred, who was a Queensland resident and had returned from South America having been on a cruise, the Celebrity Eclipse cruise overseas. The second death, sadly, was a 58-year-old female who died in Tamworth Hospital and who hadn't been on a cruise but is under investigation in terms of the source of infection. And our condolences go out to the families. Thank you very much.
Morning. New South Wales Police continue to investigate the Ruby Princess. The New South Wales Police Homicide Squad are working around the clock to gather as much evidence for that investigation as is possible. So that investigation remains ongoing. More broadly, New South Wales Police are still working around the clock to identify those people that are breaking the public health order and directions. People are continuing to flout the rules, unfortunately. So police give warnings where it's appropriate. But what we found is that people who have already been warned a number of times are now being detected and they will be and continue to be fined until they get the message. Unfortunately, some people aren't getting that message. What we're also seeing is because there are fewer people on the roads that there are some very high speeds being detected, particularly by our Highway Patrol Command, and that is not acceptable. Those speeds at any time, but particularly at this time, will take up valuable resources in our hospitals and we don't need to waste our resources on those. So we ask that people continue to maintain social distancing and follow those rules. Unless there is a reasonable excuse, they should stay at home. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I want to start by thanking Minister Hazzard for this terrific announcement of $25 million towards medical research, which will really supercharge the currently nascent efforts of researchers in our universities, our teaching hospitals and our medical research institutes across New South Wales, and really allow us to fire up those initiatives that they've been putting in place for the last 3.5 to 4 months since this epidemic became clear. We in New South Wales, in partnership with government, have made incredible advances in controlling severe epidemics that have threatened the way we live, like HIV in the past. And so what we want to do is take forward the lessons that we've learned from controlling HIV without a vaccine, but by the absolute optimal use of public health interventions and the optimal use of therapies and the optimal engagement with communities to make the most of that armamentarium to control what was a very confronting infection. We are now faced with another very confronting infection, COVID-19. And what we want to do is use the money that Minister Hazzard has announced today and use the lessons we have learned from controlling those other epidemics and been world leaders in controlling those epidemics, and to use that to control COVID-19 through large collaborative networks, working with clinicians, laboratory scientists, with government, industry, and most importantly, with the community. So we make sure that the research that we do is not only new and advances our knowledge, but can be implemented both in policy and at the coalface by our clinicians and be accepted by the community. And we have very good models for having done that in the past. Already, there are big advances that have been made in New South Wales. So at Westmead, there is a serological assay, an assay that measures antibodies that I think you've heard about before, that are important on top of our current diagnostic tests for tracking how this epidemic moves throughout the community and tracking how our immune system responds over time to this virus and whether we stay immune to this virus or not. But those assays that have been developed out there also will underpin the development of novel therapeutics that depend on those antibodies that will be useful hopefully both treating people and preventing people while we wait for the vaccine trials to become available, which are extremely important in terms of controlling this disease in the long term. We are following cohorts of patients to understand who does well and who does badly, and to develop predictive tests so that those that need greater interventions will receive those interventions. So the response of New South Wales has been extraordinary in terms of controlling this infection so far. The bar for medical research has been set very high by the public health response and by the community response to those public health messages. I'm sure the medical research community can improve even on that response with the injection of the funds that have been announced today. Thank you. So those vaccines are still in development. So as you may or may not know, there are vaccines across the world in various stages of development. There are about between 80 and 100 different vaccines being developed, some of those in Queensland and Victoria. They're still in this country, they're still at a pre-clinical stage, so they're being tested in animal models to see if they work in those animal models before they move into human clinical trials. Overseas, some of those have moved. In the US, there's been one vaccine that has moved into clinical trial, and there is a vaccine, I believe, in Oxford that is about to move into clinical trial. What we're aiming to do is to make sure that we have everything in place, all the networks to recruit the volunteers and all the ways of monitoring those patients as to work out so that we can run the clinical trials as efficiently and effectively as possible, so we get clear answers of what works and what doesn't work. So I think those trials will not start before the end of the year, I wouldn't have thought, unfortunately.
Sure. All I can say is that although the Commissioner might have a report from Aspen, there are a number of parties involved, New South Wales Health, Aspen, the cruise ship police and others. So I know that they meet at 7 o'clock every morning to discuss the condition of the crew on board, and that we're still working through that, and we're still working through getting the results of testing of the crew. So we're yet to get to a point that we can say that the crew are well enough to travel, and when we get to that point we will certainly make that clear. I think the chance of it leaving tomorrow is remote because we're putting the health of the crew first, and we want to make sure that in conjunction with all the parties, ABF, Health and Aspen and everyone else that's involved, that we make sure that the condition of those people on that ship, it makes it safe for them to travel.
What would be a more realistic time frame then tomorrow?
I wouldn't like to speculate, but certainly I would say it's towards the end of next week, but that's just an estimate at this stage, and really it really depends on the results of those tests and the condition of the people on board, and that, as you know from the members of the public that get tested and how that quickly that can change, we have to monitor that every day. I'd have to refer to health on that, but certainly I think the figures were put out this morning. It's probably an increase, but they're testing more, so I would expect that there would be a higher number of positive tests as well.
So we now have 162 crew on board have tested positive for COVID. That's an additional 9 from yesterday. And in addition, there are 13 crew members in health facilities in New South Wales. Crew members in health facilities. Not that I'm aware of. There are around 1,000 or so crew on board. So almost all the crew have now been tested. There's just a few being mopped up today. And the results are two sorts of tests. There's the PCR test to look at people who are currently unwell and who are testing positive. And then there's the antibody test to see who may be immune or give us more interpretation of what the findings are in terms of the dynamics of the outbreak on board. So those data are being analysed by the laboratory, and we're working very closely with the laboratory to understand those tests. Yeah, look, it's a complex question, and it's we're working, public health people are working very closely with laboratory experts to interpret those data. But the good thing is, as of yesterday, there had been no additional cases of likely COVID on board. So that's good news. It looks like the outbreak has been quelled, but it's a bit, we just need to have more information from those testing. No, it's really looking at the dynamics of people who are presenting with illness and the laboratory testing and putting that picture together with expert advice. So there hadn't been any new cases presented yesterday, as I understand it. Yeah, which is good news. So as reported yesterday, there were 30 cases identified. So no change in that number today.
We did. It's very disappointing, and there was another incident overnight too, where police stopped a 31-year-old male on a motorbike at Bexley for traffic offences. And during those interactions, and as a result, Wheeler alleged that he coughed and spat at the police. That person is now before the courts. He was charged with PCA, drink driving, some vehicle offences, and for spitting at police. Of course, it's very traumatic. It's traumatic and that's why this health order around public officials is so important, because these, my peers and public officers working in the front line are putting their lives ahead of other people during this time, and to have someone, spit or cough at them puts them in, no doubt, a lot of stress while they wait to see what the results are of either the person that coughed or spat, whether they're positive, and then what that means for them if they are. But just the fear that creates, and it's just abhorrent to think that people would spit at another person during this time. Like, I really just can't get my head around it because it's just so disgusting. I believe it's being reported and police are investigating, but I can't give you any further information about that. Not aware of anything, no.
No. I think, as we've said for quite some time now, it's being managed by Aspen Medical, Border Force, obviously the police, particularly Commissioner Fuller and his team, and I would assume that they'll need to be dealing with not only they will have to deal with the health issues to make sure that there's no person on that ship when they depart that would be at any risk as a result of departure. But also, as I understand it, they've been doing the investigations and interviewing people, so they have to make sure, I guess, that all those done as well. Sorry, one at a time. What? I think it's we've been over this, and I think it's fair to say that I welcome, as does the Premier, the fact that there is a commission of inquiry. There's also the police investigation, and that's where it should rest for the moment. Obviously, from a health perspective, it's terrible that so many people have actually become ill on that ship and afterwards. And I think that the action obviously is against the owners of that particular line at the moment. I think that indicates what the lawyers are thinking, but let's leave it to the Commission of Inquiry to determine what other outcomes there might be. Sorry, first and then, yeah, sorry. I think Commissioner Fuller has said that there's been a lot of discussions going on with Carnival about some of the crew actually leaving and going to their home countries, but you'd have to direct those comments or questions to Commissioner Fuller. Obviously, as Health Minister here in New South Wales, I've been focused on the health issues for all of us and not those flight issues for the ship. Sorry, you were going to ask something? I saw the media reports this morning. If it's true, then it's disappointing to say the least, but I think it's appropriate.